Hi and welcome to the Quinta, and I want to address in today's video an interesting comment that I received on the one that I put out about well, no farmers, no food. So let's go and have a look and see what we've got to say about that. Are you a climate change denier? So if you haven't watched it already, the video that I put out the other day was really asking why are the farmers protesting and how does it affect you? And obviously, you know, in a few minutes, you're not going to be able to discuss absolutely everything. But I was asked the question in one of the comments, are you a climate denier? And I thought that was a very interesting question. And my reply was, I'm not really sure what that means. So in this video, what I really want to do is to address a comment that I got from a chap called Ray. And that's up on the thing if you want to see it yourself. He says, just to be clear, on reflection of what you said about carbon in the atmosphere, are you a climate change denier? I replied to him quickly, I'm not sure what you mean by that term. Climate has always changed since Earth was formed. The question as to whether man is changing the environment is, I assume, what you're asking. As an individual, I do my best, as I tried to explain in the video, to look after the environment. I do not think that the solution to all perceived problems is for those that use private jets to tax people more. So he did actually reply to me on that in quite a lot of detail, and you know, thanks for that, Ray. You know, we're not going to agree on everything, but in general I think that what we need to try to do is to find points where we can actually have a conversation about things, because that's the only way we're actually going to advance. And he makes some interesting points about insects and insect life being perhaps less than it was in the past. He basically says to me in the reply that I appear to be indifferent to where we are. It's very difficult to you know, reply in a manner that's not going to upset people. I'm not indifferent. I am just aware of how much I, as an individual, can actually affect change. And by looking after my immediate environment, I hope to at least do my bit. So here goes. I do think that in all of this, it's actually quite important to start to consider to define what pollution actually means and what a pollutant is. So for me, I'm going to put my hat into the ring, and I'm going to say that pollution is plastics in the ocean. It is noxious gases being released into the atmosphere, let's say sulfur dioxide from the burning of brown coal. So define it for yourself. Perhaps that'll assist, and you can comment down below. And is carbon dioxide really a pollutant? I guess your opinion on that is going to determine what you think about this video in general. So here I am at the supermarket, and it's worthwhile remembering that every single thing in this supermarket required a diesel truck to bring it here. Most of the food that is in the supermarket will have also required a farmer to spend quite a lot of time and diesel in producing it. So anything that we do has a cost. And if we're going to try and break down the true cost of every single thing that we buy and that we do, we're actually going to stagnate. What does it mean to deny climate? You know, we live in an ever-changing world. It changes, the weather changes, it's hotter one day, it's colder the next, 1 year, 1 century, 1 eon. Of course it changes. We live in a planet that is affected by the output of the sun. Now today the sun is not producing quite as much heat because of cloud cover. Of course, the real thing that people are asking about today is carbon. And here is some carbon, a beautiful tree that was killed by the fire back in either 2017 or 2022. And the fires that were actually came through here at that time were not started naturally. They were the product of arson. So I think the real issue at stake here is the demonisation, the taxation of carbon dioxide. Now that is a trace gas in the atmosphere. It's obviously gained a huge amount of notoriety of late. I believe that they targeted carbon dioxide because it's easily measurable. The use of diesel, it produces, for each litre of diesel, it produces a given quantity of carbon dioxide. So you can say, right, I'm going to tax the carbon in that litre of diesel. And really the same can be said whether you're burning biomass, wood, whether you're burning coal, or in fact really undertaking any human activity. Okay, so what does it mean to be called a climate denier? I think that it's actually a relatively meaningless term if you look at it in the context of either you are or you aren't. We are subject nowadays to so many micro divisions within society. We get pigeonholed according to a throwaway comment, pigeonholed according to people's perceptions of what we think. I prefer rather to say that I don't believe the science is settled. Science, in my view, is something that is always evolving. The simple fact is that, and you probably learned this in school, we do experiments all the time to try to prove whether or not a theory is holding water. Of course, if I grab a stone, now this probably will not go upwards if I let go, but until I let go, I don't actually know. Well, there's no surprise there, is there? We know that there is a gravitational force. It pulls things downwards, presumably towards the centre of the Earth, at 9.81 meters per second squared. So that's a fairly repeatable experiment. And then what we do with experiments is we produce theories, and then we can use the data that we've collected, we can extrapolate it and make predictions. And this is where things become a little bit fuzzy. One of the things that we do when we are doing experiments is to collect data. And data sets, they are almost always partial. What I mean by that is that we never have a complete picture, which is why, as I say, we have to extrapolate data to make predictions. That then sets the foundation for the next experiment and so forth. The simple fact is that whatever we do, we are producing some form of pollution, whether it's just breathing out, whether it's deciding to eat meat. Discernment, nuance, we've really got to go back to a clearer and calmer analysis of how we live, and labelling people, pigeonholing them, is the antithesis of that. The issue with the climate is that we live in the moment, and we can feel either hot or cold, and that's going to affect probably our perception. You know, if you're told that the world is warming but you're freezing cold, or vice versa, then you're going to have some difficulty in believing that. However, let's go back to the data sets and let's again discuss partial data. If you take the data for January, let's say last month, it started off cold and it got progressively warmer. Now, if I took that data set, then I could use it to prove that the weather, the climate, if you want to call it that, is warming. But because that's a partial data set, it's actually going to show up nonsense, because we know that seasons change and it's going to be warmer in the summer than it will be in the winter. And this is exactly what is going on at the moment. And I do want to just absolutely make it clear, carbon dioxide, because it is easy to say how much you've got of it, it is taxable. You can tax a car and its tailpipe emissions based solely on how much fuel it burns. And, you know, this is a little bit of a con. If we were to really worry about plastics, then we would be saying, oh no, we're going to tax people who drop litter. But you can't tax people on dropping litter. You can fine them, but you've got to catch them. It's difficult. So if you're going to create a tax model, it's got to be something that, you know, is tangible, that you can easily collect your cash from. And let's not forget that the people who write the tax policy, they do often travel around in chauffeur-driven cars, or they go to places like Davos in a private jet to discuss what the next policies are going to be. Many people might say that this is hypocrisy. And I think that if you're saying that they are hypocrites, well, you're getting there. Why couldn't they, if it really is such a pressing problem, why couldn't they do these calls over Zoom or whatever, over Skype, or choose your program? Because that would presumably have a much lower impact on the environment than travelling halfway across the world and so forth. I think we can all understand that this is, you know, all tied up in a little bit more of a complex envelope than it looks prima facie on the face of it. So back to data sets. If you take the data from the last 150 years, which is just really after the start of the Industrial Revolution, it definitely shows a warming trend. And this is, you know, the foundation of a lot of the climate rhetoric that we see around at the moment. But we need to examine why there is a warming trend in this partial data set. And it has to do with a fact, and that is we're still coming slowly out of an ice age. So you would expect, if we're coming out of an ice age, that it's going to be getting slightly warmer over time. And if you go and do some research on ice cores, and it's absolutely fascinating. They drill right down into ice that has been deposited as snow over thousands, hundreds of thousands of years, and drill out these sausages of ice, and encapsulated in the ice are tiny little bubbles, and those bubbles are a record of what the atmosphere was made up of back in the day. Now, these ice cores show that the concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere has varied over time. And it doesn't just show that the carbon dioxide concentration has increased, it also shows that it has decreased at times. An actual fact, although it's come back up a little bit of late to 0.04%, if you go back 500,000 years, the concentration was 10 times higher. So it's very difficult to pin the fact that carbon dioxide used to make up a greater percentage of our atmosphere than it does today on the activity of humans in the last 150 years. The data doesn't support it. Now, that's not to say that we're not affecting the environment. Undeniably, we had a wildfire come through here. It destroyed 275,000 hectares. 275,000 hectares. A hectare is 100 metres by 100 metres. A huge amount of destruction. And of course, what happens? It burnt, it killed all the trees, killed a load of animals, and put a load of carbon into the atmosphere. The fact that this was the result of arson, I suppose you could argue that that was man-made or man-induced climate change. I remember in the 1970s, and there's an absolutely brilliant film with Leonard Nimoy, who was Spock from Star Trek. He was narrating it, and it was actually warning of us going into a new ice age. And yeah, as a kid, oh gosh, we're suddenly going to get cold and freezing and what have you, and that was the big bogeyman. We then went into global warming. I'm not quite sure how they managed to flip it, apart from using partial data. And now they've rebranded it again. They've called it climate change. It's a lot more difficult to disprove something that is as open-ended as climate change than it is to prove something like global warming or global cooling. So they can keep us in a perpetual state of fear. They can divide us up into camps of those who are climate change fanatics or climate change deniers. Do you see how the language works? It's made to cause micro divisions, and it's very successful. You know, you can have a fight about, you know, whatever you like nowadays, whether it is about the question of gender, whether it is left or right in politics. But at the end of the day, if you sit down in a room with a load of other people and you're listening to Mozart, you're going to have emotions that transcends all of this. And it's possibly better to zoom out and to start to examine why people would want to divide us. If you look around, all these rocks, some of them have been piled up to make walls. They've been collected off the land and put to one side. But even these huge ones up here, and they really are massive. They are here because they were deposited by a glacier melting, and you can actually see the result of it up here. I believe it's called Terminal Moraine. So once upon a time, it was pretty cold here. The ice sheets that covered the UK and most of Europe really stretched down an awful long way. I don't know. Is it better to be hot or is it better to be cold? Or are we better in Goldilocks territory, which arguably is where we are now? Of course, the question is, how do we preserve that and keep it for our children? Because we are just the guardians of this wonderful planet, just as we're the guardians of this amazing quinta here in Portugal. You know, in 20, 30, 50, 100 years, none of us are going to be here. So it does beg the question, what timescale should we be acting on? Should we be making decisions now that are going to have an impact in 100 years? Or should we be making decisions now that actually have an impact now? So we've got to think about the impact of going to war, to conflict. We've got to think about, do we burn stuff or do we mulch? Because burning, it releases gases more quickly. But if you mulch stuff, it's still going to go into the carbon cycle. The carbon cycle, as you may well remember from school, is gas is released into the atmosphere, plants suck it up, plants grow, and then you use those plants and it just goes around and around. It's astonishing to see so much stuff that is still blackened from nearly 2 years ago. And I've been spending a lot of time going around trying to clear away this blackened stuff, because if it remains there, when the next fire comes through, it's got more fuel, so it's going to be more intense. With any luck, we won't get another fire for 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 years, but it's absolutely inevitable that it's going to come through. So we're trying to mitigate that particular possibility of disaster, and we're working on a 5-year timescale there. Talking of timescales, talking of term, I saw this little tweet come up. More EU madness. They now want to pass legislation to make it illegal to repair cars more than 15 years old, forcing us into EVs we don't want. We have to take a stand. Well, yes, we do need to consider the impact of the vehicles that we drive. Just to go a little bit further into that, a significant step in this journey is the 2035 ban on new combustion engine cars, excluding vehicles operating on potential future synthetic fuels. However, the reality presents challenges, as the uptake of low or zero emission vehicles in the EU lags behind expectations, varying significantly across member states. That's very true. There's a poster up in Guarda the other day, and they were advertising brand new Volkswagen electric vehicles, and they were offering 4 years free charging. 4 years. It's sort of an indication that people don't really want these things, because although it looks fantastic, you know, you get free charging for 4 years, do you really think that a motor manufacturer is going to offer 4 years free charging if these things are flying off the shelves? That's on the back of Hertz in the United States. They've offloaded 20,000 electric vehicles because they don't actually fit their business model. And they're going back to petrol, conventional internal combustion, ICE engined vehicles because EVs aren't working for them. And if they're not working for one of the largest car hire companies in the world, you have to wonder how it's going to work for you. If you live in a town and you've got access to charging, then they're probably absolutely great. However, I've got my ancient Toyota here, and this is perfect for me, but there are some interesting bits and pieces coming forward. Let me just go back to this. Spain, for example, now has an average vehicle age exceeding 14 years, with over 40% of vehicles, 47%, excuse me, of vehicles older than 15 years. So if the European Union wants to ban vehicles over 15 years to get us into less polluting vehicles, then 47% of Spanish vehicles may well not legally be allowed to be repaired pretty soon. Now, this legislation hasn't gone through yet, so it may well get kicked out. But it's a perfect example of short-termism. We need, again, to expand the timescales that we're actually looking at.
I mean, it's going to potentially boost the production of new cars, so that's good for the economy. But what of the environment? Are we not going to be expending a huge amount of new raw materials to produce these brand new vehicles simply in an effort to reduce tailpipe emissions? If we're just taking those tailpipe emissions and putting them on a power station a few miles away out of town, well, arguably that's good for air quality for the people that live in town. Of course, electric vehicles tend to be quieter as well. But in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't make a difference. Not an appreciable one that I can see really going forward having any impact on the environment.
So there's always a bigger picture, and we really do need to zoom out. If you were an ant living in an anthill, you know, your perception of the world is going to be very, very different to a larger creature and a larger creature and a larger creature. Just as if you are standing on the ground here, you get a very different perspective than if you were up in the International Space Station. I'm going to leave it up to you to decide whether I'm a climate denier. I personally think that the label is absolutely meaningless. I've already told you that I think it is about divisions and micro divisions. I would just encourage you, as I said in the previous video, to be discerning, to think about the decisions that you make, whether they are financial ones, environmental ones, whatever, and live your best life. Is that a controversial topic to talk about? Probably. Let me know what you think in the comments, because I am not fixed in my mindset. I like learning. I think that one of the ways that we remain relatively young in our heads is to always continue to learn. Not to be pigeonholed, not to just assume that nothing ever can change, that we're fixed in a moment in time. Now, technology changes so quickly, we don't know what's going to happen in 50 years. So, many of you will have seen the old truck, which was a casualty of the fire. How much energy, how much pollution did its destruction cause? What you doing? Hello? The problem that we run into if we do continue to allow ourselves to be divided, to be put into pigeonholes, is we start to look at the cost of everything and we lose sight of the value of things.